Thank you all for being here. For those of you who don't know, my name is Layla. I am the Health Education Manager here at the International Foundation for Autoimmune Autoinflammatory Arthritis, or AiArthritis for short. I am joined here by a few of our volunteers. I am a person living with lupus and with Sjogren's disease. And so a lot of the education and a lot of the programs that we do here are all completely patient-led. We are a patient-led organization where a lot of our leaders all do live with AiArthritis diseases. So we want to know that we want you to know that we understand and that we are here with you to learn, explore, research, do all the things that you want to do having to do with your disease. So I will let our volunteers go ahead and introduce themselves with your name, where you are tuning in from, and your diagnosis. I'm tuning in from Southern California. Deb, if you want to take it away.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Deb Constein. I am tuning in from the Madison, Wisconsin area, and I am a longtime volunteer for AiArthritis and love this organization. It's amazing. And I was diagnosed with RA when I was 13 years old. So 40 plus years of this journey. Daileen, do you want to go next?
Thank you. So I'm Daileen. I am tuning in from Southern California as well. And I am living with Still's disease as of earlier this year. And then I'll pass it over to Brittany.
Hi, I'm Brittany Murray. I'm tuning in from St. Louis, Missouri. I have psoriatic arthritis, and so not quite 40 years, but 30 living with psoriatic disease. So it also has been quite the journey.
I totally get you. Yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 12, so 15 years. It's a long time. Daileen, late to the party, but still just as much of a struggle. I can only imagine getting diagnosed when you were at your age. So that is craziness. Yeah. Already, we have a few people in the chat that I wanted to say hi to. We have Michael, one of our volunteer and administrative assistants. So hi, Michael. And we also have Estella Mata here in the chat too. Hi, Estella. She is from Looms for Lupus, one of our organizations that we're really close to and is one of our friends. She actually is in Southern California too, in the Baldwin Park area. So she says hi. So thank you for tuning in, Estella. We are going to go ahead and hop into our video for today. We are tuning in to another friend of our organization, Cheryl Crow's webinar that she had last month having to do with managing stress and having a chronic illness. And as we all know, stress is a trigger for our diseases. So this is a very important coping tool that we all have to learn. The biggest thing for me is identifying stress. I feel like it's really hard sometimes to know when you're actually stressed, or when my body's stressed versus when my mind's stressed and things like that. We will hop into this. Let me share my screen. Actually, I'm going to need to redo that because of the sound. There we go. Let's see.
And it's not a good acronym, but the chart is amazing, but just the name is not great. If anyone is really good at if anyone wants to help me, I will pay you to help me make that into a nicer acronym. I just couldn't figure it out. So we're going to figure out what kind of problem it is that's bothering you, so you can have choose which response is more helpful based on the type of problem you're having. If it's a thinking problem, we're going to catch ants, which are automatic negative thoughts, and then act and adapt. Those are for the perpetual problems, the things that we have to adapt to and maybe that aren't going to get better. And Rosie's iPhone, very true. The tools evolve over time to deal with what comes. Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. And we change. Pausing, this is something I don't do well because I'm a fast person who's very impatient. So the first tool is to identify what kind of problem it is, okay? bear with me here. And Lauren helped me think through. I was like, should I unveil the chart? Is it too much? I know this is a lot. I will not surprise you to learn I am not a graphic designer. I just learned Canva, but I know there's a better way to present this. But the decision helper truly is what I use. I realized that this has been helpful for me, and I needed to list it out in a chart form to explain it better. You first think, okay, is there a different way to think about this problem? Will thinking about it differently solve the problem or make it seem not as overwhelming? And so if yes, then we go into the CBT reframing tools. And if you're still stressed even if you have an accurate reframe and you're still stressed, you come back to the ACT and ADAPT, which is the acceptance and commitment therapy tools I'm going to talk about later. And then if it's not a thinking problem, we ask, is it a solvable or persistent problem? And then either solve it or we cope with it. Okay. Oh, Chantel, yeah. I'm so glad you're happy with the chart. You've seen it. You saw it in the previous form as well. So I gave a similar talk to this 2 years ago. And so I've improved upon it. I hope that's my goal. Sometimes I tweak things too much and then they get worse, but hopefully it got better. So you ask yourself, is it a thinking problem? These are examples of the 3 different kinds of problems that I tend to face. There's this thinking problem, which is like saying I'm stressed because nobody will ever understand me and what I'm going through. That's a thinking problem because I'm making a choice in the kind of words I'm using here to describe it that can be changed or modified. And then it doesn't mean that it's necessarily completely accurate, that we don't have the information yet to know whether nobody will ever. Maybe we can reframe that a little bit. If it's not a thinking problem, example could be like, I'm stressed because I'm in pain and I want a tool to reduce the pain. Let's be ambitious here for a minute and think that could be I was going to say partially solvable, right? You may have a pain toolbox. You have cold packs, hot packs, medications, topical creams, things that you can do to help reduce the pain. I didn't say eliminate the pain. I said reduce it even slightly. And then persistent problems are ones that are going to be there no matter what. I'm stressed because I don't know what's going to happen in the future. That is not a solvable problem. Okay. And I got this language of solvable versus perpetual.
Okay, so we're going to jump in here, and she went over the different types of problems that you might have in your life that could lead to stress, and then therefore trying to figure out how to help yourself with that. One of the biggest things I think is, like stopping and pausing and realizing, okay, what is the problem here? And that's something that I learned, like I had to learn how to do when it came to therapy also, because I feel like you just are so focused on the problem and you want to solve it, but figuring out what kind of problem it is first can really help you. I think a lot of people in the beginning stages of their diagnosis or their disease journey, they are more like, that's the problem that she stated right there in the beginning, where it's, I'm in so much pain and I don't know what to do. I can't help myself. I just want to get better. There's like, why do I have to deal with this? Like, why me? Those kinds of problems. And it takes a long time to come to the realization. And like she said, there's the persistent problems are things that you're going to have to deal with in your life and learn how to cope with that. Daileen, since you're newly diagnosed, how was that coming to that realization that this is your new normal?
Yeah, it was definitely hard. On the first days, I was crying a lot, just randomly. And my mom asked me, it's gonna be fine. And it was really scary at first, but then I started getting into books of doctors who also had autoimmune diseases, autoinflammatory diseases. And that really changed my perspective really quickly. And just going over as much knowledge as I could really helped me go through those different phases.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, I definitely think books, blogs, all of those YouTube videos really do help when you realize, especially that so many people can have these diseases and still do so much with their life and do everything that someone who doesn't have these diseases can. Maybe a little bit tougher for us in some situations, but that should, our diseases should never stop us from achieving that. And do any of you have experience with kind of thinking about like exactly what kind of problem like you might be going through, and like kind of any questions that you ask yourself when you're starting to feel stressed out?
I feel like I give myself grace because I know I'm going to have my bad days. And when you feel good for a good period of time and then it slaps you down again, that's it. It does take a lot of inner strength, I guess I'll call it. And my biggest thing that I think about is I don't want to sit there and have a pity party, because that is not gonna help me or anybody else around me being in a pity party. Again, I have my bad days, so I will have my woe is me moments, but I don't I give myself grace because I don't want to lengthen it any longer than I have to. And as far as thinking the type of stress, I don't think that deep about it. I haven't really ever done that before, but it's an interesting perspective. But I also, I just caution myself not to let myself sink too low, because I'm like, life's still got to go on.
No, definitely. I think that with those, it's like I give myself a certain amount of time to feel whatever I'm feeling, and then you just have to pick yourself back up and figure it out after that. But feeling your feelings, I think like not pushing through them too fast is one of the keys too, so that you can process all of it. We have a comment here from Kim. She said, "This is so true. I'm a huge stressor and have stills from 9 years old, so 30 years. I set myself off into so many flares and just can't let stress go sometimes." Kim, we're going to continue playing this video, and hopefully you get some tips on how to manage your stress a little bit better, because yeah, it's so scary to know that you can cause yourself to go into more of a flare. Trying to keep that as calm as possible, it can really help your health. Let's go on to the next clip.
It's not popping up yet.
Those are really nice pictures.
So let's go on to the example of a thinking problem. A thinking problem can be resolved by thinking differently about it. I'm going to show you how. Think about the shoulder angel model. Okay, like you have your little shoulder angel, and I'll explain that a little bit more later. But an ANT stands for automatic negative thoughts. So these are like cognitive distortions or ways of helping that are just either inaccurate and unhelpful. So it's a very common exercise from cognitive behavior therapy. And that teaches you how to be a detective about your thoughts, gather evidence, say, is this true or not? And is there maybe another way to look at it if there's some ambiguity? If you have a distortion in your thought, you learn how to reframe it. So this is literally an example. This actually happened yesterday, but I had already made this slide 2 years ago. But it happened again yesterday, which is a situation is you forgot to take your meds. Even though I have this beautiful medication organizer, I have a reminder that goes off at certain times of day for certain meds. And I always tell myself, do not turn that alarm off until you actually take the meds. But lo and behold, yesterday, I turned it off before I actually took the meds and I forgot. But then I remembered later. But it was like 7 hours later and try to take them at the same time. So anyway, my first thought was, oh my gosh, I'm stupid. Like, how could I do this? I've been taking these meds for 20 years. And then when you have those thoughts, it leads to the feelings that are frustration, anger, and behaviors that stem from that. So that's the process of a lot of cognitive behavior therapy, also known as CBT, is like learning how to find a reframe or a different way of thinking about it. You're not saying that you're not like having toxic positivity where you're like, forgetting to take your meds is awesome. Good job. Like, no, you recognize this is the reality. You forgot. but you can find a replacement, reframe way of thinking about it. Like, I'm human, it happens. And that replacement thought leads to feelings that are more self-compassionate and behavior that reflects your values more. And Tracy, you have the fancy 2-row version. Yes, the pill reminder with the morning and afternoon. I used to have that. I've graduated to the single one. Some people graduate to the teeny tiny one. So I often do, I'm a very visual person. I don't know how many of you are, but I imagine like little mini versions of myself, like the shoulder angel versus the shoulder, or with shoulder coach versus shoulder critic. Is I try not to use like religious language. The shoulder coach, you can do it. You're a human. It's okay. We all make mistakes. And then the shoulder critic is just, you're stupid. You're stupid. And actually, this is something that acceptance and commitment therapy also does talk about, where Dr. Russ Harris calls it radio doom and gloom. Like our brains are wired to pay more attention to negative feedback and negative situations because they're more likely to threaten our survival. So just question yourself, are you listening to one of these voices, the shoulder coach versus the shoulder critic, more than the other? So again, the shoulder with my pictures. Yes, and Allison, I'm going to go more on ACT is like my favorite. Shoulder critic is you forget everything. You teach other people to manage their health and you can't even do it yourself. What a loser. I literally have those thoughts all the time. And I've just learned how to be like, to quickly reframe them and be like, okay, yeah, I did forget. I wish I didn't, but that is what it is. And I can do better next time. And I know how to solve this problem. It is solvable. It's just, I just made a mistake. So I'm curious, does anyone here want to share? Oh my gosh, Jen, so true. We're harder on ourselves and each other. Does anyone want to share just in the chat, or you can raise your hand, I can unmute you, any of the automatic negative thoughts you might have had?
Alrighty. This is something that I, again, really worked on in therapy. I think that the way that I grew up, I always got told everything that I did wrong and never got told anything that I did right. So I feel like my thoughts as I grew up automatically were like, you're so stupid. Why did you do this? Like all of those things, whether it be having to do with my disease or not having to do with my disease. And I think really being able to reframe has helped me a lot with negative self-talk. That was the biggest thing that I had to work on. And I feel like I didn't even have the coach shoulder. I always just had the critic shoulder. So now with being able to reframe, I feel like it's helped a little bit more. But any specific negative self-talk that you've had for like having to do with your disease at all?
For me, I'm always going from, oh, I had a really good day. I'm going to burn myself out and use all my energy in one day. And then the next day I'm like, why did you do all of those things yesterday? You could have just sat on the couch for an hour and you would be able to open a can. And so getting myself out of the let's overdo it and blame ourselves to what tools do I have that I can use to open this can, and getting to that point. I'm like a 180er. I don't have a middle ground. So trying to convince myself that there is a middle ground and you should stop and think about what you're doing and realize that something hurts before it hurts too bad. That's where I am.
No, definitely. Yeah, sometimes when you feel good, you just want to keep going and you're like, this is rare. So I totally feel you. Daileen or Deb, any insight?
Go ahead. I would say, so I'm trying to go to sleep at the same time every single time. And if like 2 nights ago, I went to sleep really late and I feel like I'm being irresponsible to myself. But if I keep having those thoughts, it doesn't happen all the time. So this really helped me see not to be too hard on that.
Definitely.
As far as that goes, I think that's brilliant because you got to give yourself grace, and you probably needed that rest. I think it's just impactful both ways. One thing I always think about is my husband and I have been married for 29 years, and he's learned, and it definitely took a lot of communication, and actually communication was key between us, is if he ever tells me like something like, do you really think you should be doing that? Or those type of things. Again, he's saying it from the heart, but nobody's going to tell me what I can or can't do. And it makes me even more stubborn. And again, it's through communication, and it's always, and sometimes I'll say, should I be doing it? No, but I'm going to, and I know how I'm going to feel tomorrow, and I'm okay with that. Goofiness with that as far as that goes, but having a partner that's there and feeding into it helps a lot, but it also can be like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it all depends on tone. If you like, when something turns like a little condescending, I'm like, now I'm not listening to you. So what do we do now? Alrighty, let's continue on to the next clip.
So these reframing is helpful when you're drawn to that black or white thinking. I'm terrible. This is never going to get better. I deserve this because I must have done something wrong to make this condition happen to me. Or if one friend invalidates your illness, thinking no one will ever understand me. And those are completely valid fears to have, but the reframe would be like, it feels like that, validating your feeling, but knowing that we don't actually have data that no one ever will. But yeah, I'm saying right now, the power of adding now, or it feels like no one ever understands me. But it's not helpful if there's no way that if you could think about the way I think about this is when it comes to things like uncertainty about the future, will it get better? Will it get worse? I could try to gather data all day long, and it's never going to answer the question because there is no data on the future, right? For the detective to collect. How do we cope in those situations? That's why I really like ACT, which is the acceptance and commitment therapy. And this is where I learn how to not only improve symptoms again, which is something that is important to have in your toolbox, but also focus on accepting and adapting to what's happening in the present. This is my little spiel on this. Some of you might have heard this part of this in the Arthritis Life Hack Extravaganza earlier this year. The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. So I've already said this a couple of ways, but some problems are solvable and some problems are going to be persistent or unsolvable. And it sounds so simple, but I honestly think we have to just call out the elephant in the room. And as a health provider, as an occupational therapist, I'll say it's really upsetting to me that so many people, other health providers, it's almost like they're scared to say that. I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but they're scared to say that because it makes their job seem like they're not doing a good job. But we don't have solutions to all problems, right? Otherwise, we would all live forever and like medicine would solve everything. So some parts of your health are in your control and some are going to be out of your control. Maybe this sounds overly basic to you, but this actually took me like a few years of therapy to really accept this, because I was like, no, maybe for other people, but I'm different. I'm going to try super extra hard and I'm going to be the exception and I'm going to figure out how to control everything. I remember one time, literally, I think this is actually a meme, but I told my therapist, because other people have gone through this, where I was like, but I'm really good at being in control. Like, why are you talking about control? It's a bad thing. I'm so good at it. And he's, how's that working for you? No, he was like, it being in control works when the problem's controllable, but not all your problems are controllable. And I'm like, yes, they are. I just haven't figured it out yet. So being stubborn and optimistic, I've said this on my podcast before, but being stubborn and optimistic will get you many wonderful places in life, but it will also get you stuck if you're trying to be stubborn and optimistic about solving an unsolvable problem. That is not helpful for you. So learning to let go and let go of solving an unsolvable problem, and then not just be like, oh, I have nothing to do anymore, is you let go of the unsolvable and then you hold on to what is still possible in your life. That's the beautiful thing that I'm trying to achieve. Yeah. Oh yeah, and people are telling me to get out of their heads because they've been there too in the DMs. Okay, how do you cope with all the things we can't control? I would say with great difficulty, but it is easier to do when we have other people with us, like all 67 of you right now on the call. I'm so happy to see. It is inherently stressful to have things that are super out of your control. Human beings want to be in control. We want to feel like we're in charge of our destiny. And that actually comes into the ableism that someone said, Tracy, in our society, We get told that chronic health issues are failures on our part. We get told that because everyone wants to think that they're in control. The healthy, able-bodied people think that their power of their thoughts and their health-related behaviors are why they got sick. And I'll just say really quick as an aside, I was in the peak of shape when I got diagnosed with RA. I could run a mile in 5.5 minutes. I was a varsity soccer player on my college team. I ate well, I exercised, I was happy. And this hit me out of nowhere. These things can come out of nowhere. And even if I wasn't perfectly healthy, I'm saying that it's just a counter example, right, to the cultural programming of you just need to like take control of your health and then you would never get sick. That's not true. It's a rude awakening, but it's not true. So back to my train of thought here. How do you cope with the things that are out of your control? First of all, can't skim over the step. We have to actually differentiate or define what we can versus can't control. I honestly encourage people to make an actual list because it can feel really overwhelming and confusing. But if you're like, okay, I can control whether I physically put this medication in my mouth, like Xeljanz. I can't necessarily control whether Xeljanz is going to control my inflammation well. That's out of my control, right? I just put the medication in my mouth and then I can't control whether it works. I can control how much value I give to my automatic thoughts, and I can't control them coming up in the first place. I can control the words I say to other people, but I cannot control them choosing to believe me or not, right? And then of course, I want to acknowledge there's a gray area, the zone of partial control. We have to learn how to just cope with that. But this is I changed my ordering here. So this is actually step 3. So this is the acceptance and commitment therapy, which is like my favorite strategy for coping with like stress, anxiety, not just from chronic illness, but honestly, just life. It's helped me as a mom. It's helped me as a wife. It's helped me as a daughter. It's just helped me cope with anything in life that is challenging for me. So the 3-step process, there's so many different processes in ACT, but there's a 6-step hexaflex process, but I'm just going to talk about the one right now. That's A, standing for accept your thoughts and feelings exactly as they are. And this includes accepting your sensations, even pain, which is really hard. I understand, because I said earlier, it is not intuitive to connect to the present moment when the present is painful. Then you connect to your values, what's important to you. And the T is you take effective action. So here's an example, or the way Russ Harris says it. He is a psychologist who specializes in ACT and has written some great books about it. You make room for your feelings and everything, allow them to be exactly as you are, and then you ask, what can I do right now that is meaningful or important? That's different than asking, how can I feel better? It's a simple shift in thinking, but it's very different than our problem solving mindset that a lot of us tend to get into is, I just need to get better. I just need to remove this barrier of arthritis and then my life would be all better. It's true your life would be easier, but don't live under the illusion that all your problems would ever be solved. We're always going to have problems. That's just part of life. So ACT isn't about feeling better. It's about feeling better. So raise your hand if you've seen the movie Inside Out, by the way. Inside Out is very congruent with the acceptance and commitment therapy thing. Yes. Okay. I'm lowering my hand. I raised
my Okay. So I think that the Venn diagram that she had of the things you can't control versus the things that you can control was really good to put it into perspective. And I think it's funny because I went through like exactly cognitive behavioral therapy, the exact kind of same steps that she explains in this, when I was dealing with all my like negative self-talk and using I statements instead of thinking like what your perspective is for fact. I think that was one of the biggest things that I learned too, is that when you speak, it's really important to say, this is how I feel, and that it's not exactly fact, that if it's coming from your mind doesn't mean exactly that it's fact. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I learned. And also, coming into like with things that you can control. I would stress so much about my family back home in the Bay Area when I'm down here in LA, and think about all the different things that I could do and if I were there, and that would cause me to spiral and to be like, is it really important for me to be down here when apparently they need my help and things like that. And it was like, I have to really sit down and think about, okay, you can only control what you can control. You aren't there. So there's no point in stressing off of it. And it took me 2-3 years to really be able to release those things that like, maybe I could try and do something, but that would put me into a bad headspace too. So sometimes it's not even worth going there. But identifying those issues that you have is the biggest thing first before you can even do anything with those thoughts. Any commentary on the things that you can control versus the things you can't control?
I think accepting where you are in your condition at any given time, like it changes. Like the biggest one for me was when I had a drug that made me feel like normal for a long period of time, and then going to a point where there is no one drug that is going to make me feel that way probably ever again, at least with what's on the market today. And accepting, I was like, I'm only going to ever take one drug. I'm not taking two. I'm not taking three. I'm not using braces. That's ridiculous. I've had this with one drug. And accepting where you are, like today I need a brace. Today I need to take two drugs, and not fighting with yourself about it, but just accepting that and acting appropriately at that moment has been the hardest thing for me.
Yeah, I think that it's just the day-to-dayness of our diseases causes a lot of annoyance, to be completely honest. Like, I'm lucky that I work from home and I'm able to do all of this from the comfort of my bedroom. But when I wasn't working from home and I did have to get up at 6 o'clock every day and get up and get dressed, there's some days where it just feels impossible to be able to do everything on time. And when you're not feeling that well, and accepting that is really hard. That it's like, why was I able to do this yesterday and I can't do it today? It just doesn't make sense at all. So I totally get what you're saying, Britt.
Have any of you guys ever woken up and been in really crummy shape and just in your head just keep saying over and over, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this. It's such the negative talk that happens, but it doesn't last long for me, because you can't let it. So it's a matter of, okay, let me get up and at least take on what I can. So I'm at least making some progress. But I know that happens. I don't have time for this. Are you kidding me?
No, exactly. And I think what's harder too is now that, like, when we're talking about stress, it's like, it's during those times though when a lot of it happens, is because you have a lot going on. You have something due for work. You have a party that you're planning for this weekend, and you need to make sure that you're doing all these things. And then you wake up the next day and you're like, this is literally the day before the party. I need to go and pick up everything. Like, why is this happening? And that's exactly why it's happening. And it's, what is this conundrum that we have to go through in order to like get things done in our normal life? And so I really had to take a very laissez-faire, like lackadaisical approach to a lot of my outside events nowadays, because it's like, sometimes you just can't go, and it is what it is. And I think that was a really big like realization for me, because I grew up with family being like number one, and me being the oldest of my generation, having to show up and pick everybody up and do everything for everybody. And my family's been very like, what is up with you? And I'm like, I don't have time. I don't have the energy. I don't have all of the facilities that I used to have to be able to help you all. So you are going to have to try to find somebody else, because it is not me anymore. And that's a really weird realization, especially for everybody else. And they're like, we're so used to being able to just call you and you can do all these things. And I'm like, putting up boundaries has really helped me a lot in the past few years. So I think that, yeah, just really needing to stick up for yourself and knowing this is the expectation that I grew up with, but sometimes you just got to throw it out the window and just say, this is what I need for my life. And that's really hard to do. And it's stressful to have all these expectations on you. And that therefore can cause more flares and things like that.
Yes, Daileen, being newly diagnosed, how is that perspective for you? And do you have, and if I'm asking questions that you're not comfortable with, totally good, but is your family supportive of you, and are they helping pick you up and things like that? I'm just curious, being fairly newly diagnosed, you've had all the experiences already, but where are you at?
Yeah, they are. I actually was quite surprised. I thought that they were gonna start saying you got sick because you were staying up too late too many times, or sometimes at the beginning I did get a little bit of that, but as time started going by, there's been a lot of support, and I'm really grateful for that. And it really helps, especially with the presentation that we're seeing now. Everything just gets connected. So yeah.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So I have one more clip. It is 12 minutes long. So if I do play it, we are going to be on here a little bit later. Do any of you have any obligations that you need to get to right after? Is it okay if we go like 10 minutes after? Okay, sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and play the video.
My hand too. Everyone's connecting so well. It's wonderful, Tracy. Thank you for saying that. So my favorite definition of mindfulness, so ACT is kind of like if mindfulness and cognitive behavior therapy had a baby. So it is a behavior approach along with being a mindfulness-based approach, but it's about keeping your attention in the present moment, making space for it without judgment. It's not about trying to change what you're feeling, again, to feel more peaceful. It's just saying, this is how I feel. I'm going to take a minute to contact the present moment. And why is that so hard? Because for us, many of us with chronic illness, like we've discussed earlier, pain is uncomfortable, and the present moment's often uncomfortable, and it makes us pain, as the great writer John Green said, pain demands to be felt. But then we are scared of it and overwhelmed by it and try to like distract ourselves or find a solution to it all the time. So the problem with that is that in psychology, there's a saying, that which we resist persists. So the more we try to distract ourselves from our pain, the more power it potentially has over us. So here's like a little citation for that. So just real quick, I'm trying to make a little case for acceptance. I know that acceptance is like the last thing most people want to think about or do when they have a chronic illness. And again, this took me years in therapy and learning to finally come around to it, but I'm trying to see if I can, in 1 hour, maybe inspire people to even just consider the role of acceptance-based mindsets. Not that it's not the only mindset that I have, but it is definitely a helpful one. So it means, my favorite definition of acceptance, it isn't being happy with whatever is happening, right? It just means taking what's offered. Life is offering you this, right? Life is offering you a chronic illness. Life is offering you a challenge, right? And you can turn from that or try to blind yourself to it, convince yourself it's not there, or you can actually take a moment to actually turn towards it and actively take it. Like, okay, that's what contacting the present moment is about, and then expanding to make room for what you feel right now without resistance, regardless of whether it might get better in the future. And it does not mean giving up or feeling hopeless, saying that no matter what I do, everything's going to be terrible. It just means being willing. There's a concept in ACT called willingness, being willing to contact the present moment. And that's been really helpful. So this is the little finger trap toy. Oh no, it ran off with my son. I have one on my desk normally. But so the things that cause discomfort in our lives are like the one side of the finger trap toy, right? And so we can resist them. And when we resist, it gets tense and we get trapped and we get stuck, right? Or we can relax into them and we can actually accept them or allow them. And that is less of a trap. That's a more comfortable. Yeah. And Evie, it reminds you of the yes and use and improvisation. Yeah. So the paradox is that it feels like giving up, because fighting and resisting the present when it's uncomfortable it's like an active thing. You're like, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to make it better. But it's actually ultimately not helpful. It ultimately gets you stuck. So accepting and allowing first seems like giving up, but actually that's what the paradox is like. It's the opposite of what you would think. Okay. So this is why it was so unintuitive to me. So it'd be like, just remember the part in Zoolander where David Duchovny explains to Derek Zoolander this 10-minute monologue about like why male models are the perfect assassins. And then Zoolander, but why male models? That was me with acceptance. My therapist would be like, blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, but why? So I hope I'm at least, again, I know I might not be explaining it perfectly, but I'm doing my best to plant the seed in your head that maybe will bloom at one point. And one of the famous exercises in ACT is passengers on the bus. So you imagine all your thoughts and feelings and sensations as passengers on the bus, and you are the driver. So regarding your chronic illness, you probably have a lot of different kinds of thoughts. Some of them are like scared thoughts. Some of them are sad. Some of them are positive. Some of them are, okay, just keep thinking positive. Some are overwhelmed. And what you do in ACT, instead of the regular CBT one where it's, let's think of the evidence of that, or let's reframe it, think about it a different way, you just allow all those thoughts, all those feelings, and you get what's called, you become the observing self, and you get cognitive distance from those thoughts, and you just acknowledge that they're thoughts, and you just literally say hello to them. Hello, thought, you're telling me lots of stories. There's a story that I'm a failure, or that I can't handle this, or I need to think positive. And you don't try to change what the thoughts are. This is where it's like a radical acceptance, right? Like, okay, this is what they are. This is what it is. This is what my brain is doing right now. This is what my body's doing right now. And then you remind yourself, regardless of these thoughts, what if all these thoughts, these feelings, the pain, the discomfort, the overwhelm, the uncertainty, let me go back really quickly. What they're trying to get you to do is stop or change direction, right? They're saying we need to slow down, we need to stop driving, or we need to go faster, we need to pull over. And what if we just say, I'm going to keep going in the direction that I want to go, towards a meaningful life, towards thriving, towards living as full life as possible, given my illness. Not to say that your illness won't pose limitations. It does. It just does. But there are still, as long as we're not in a coma, right, we still have choices. And I think that when we learn how to flex this like acceptance muscle, we become more attuned to the possibilities that are still in our lives, rather than thinking, I just have to fix it. I just have to make my health go away. Oh, are you all seeing each other's comments? Someone just said that they're not seeing all the comments. Sorry. I don't know. Maybe I'm not seeing all the comments either. So the biggest challenge for me personally, I think I alluded to this on social media a little bit when I was talking about this talk, is I was talking about this webinar, was uncertainty. So this is what I've come up with, is the uncertainty and the unknowns of life with chronic illness are, for me, the biggest challenge to accept. Because what I want to immediately do when faced with uncertainty is figure out what the answer is, right? Figure out, okay, well, what's the treatment plan? Just tell me what to do. The problem, or if you want to know if it's going to get better, I just want to know, tell me if it's going to get better, or tell me if it's going to get worse. And the problem is, no one can answer that question for you fully and completely. Your medical team might be able to give you ideas of your prognosis, based on prognosis, meaning how fast your disease might progress, based on your inflammation markers and based on your family history and such. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be a level of uncertainty. If those who've had children, there's a child, you can have your birth plan, and then there's what happens, right? There's life. So there's 3 different doors people tend to go to. They either want to do the positive thinking door, which is like, okay, things are uncertain right now, and it's going to make me feel comforted to think that it's going to get better for sure. And that's actually a form of certainty. You're saying it's going to get better. All I need to do is figure it out. That's definitely where I was for a very long time, and still want to go. That's where my brain wants to go. And then there's the doom and gloom, which is what some people's brains are biased towards, right? It'll never get better. There's no hope. I might as well not try. And neither of these are actually helpful to take to their extreme, because they're both different forms of uncertainty. One is it will get better, and one is it will get worse. But the middle door, the middle ground here, is accepting uncertainty, accepting it might get better, it might get worse. I don't know. Can I still get attuned to what is possible in my life, and how can I derive meaning from my existence with this uncertainty, with the uncertainty being one of these annoying passengers on the bus that I'm not going to get rid of, but I can continue to drive towards where I'm going. Yeah, and Angela, if you're a problem solver, uncertainty drives you nuts. That's exactly the words that my therapist used for me too. Is you're really great at solving problems, and that's great if it's a solvable problem, but not all your problems are solvable. So there's the fixing mindset, which I'm not trying to say you never should use this, right? Of course, there are times that we need to fix what's going on, and that's part of having your disease management toolbox. But there is also going to be a point where you're going to have to allow what's happening in the present, allow the things that are out of your control, and turn your attention towards what's still possible in your life, despite that discomfort. And that's a really empowering, for me, at least been a really empowering experience. So throwback to my earlier slide, feels like 5 years ago. It was only less than an hour ago, but we are finding this tenuous balance. And I can't tell you, oh, is it 60% of my energy goes towards fixing versus 40% towards thriving, despite in reality, during a given day, you're back and forth between these different tools constantly. But I hope that this webinar has inspired you to think about the role of an acceptance-based or thriving despite mindset. All the roads to me, they lead back to this, either enjoying your life as best you can with whatever stress is remaining, or using your adapting coping tools and accepting that there are going to be some unsolvable problems in your life, and choosing to use your energy to lean into your life as it is, versus trying to keep solving the does that make sense? I'm seeing some nods. Thank you for the nods. That's helpful. So the recap, so you pause and define what kind of problem it is, because you don't want to spend all your time. Also, you don't want to try to solve an unsolvable problem, and you also don't want to try thinking differently about a problem that's not really going to be changed by thinking differently about it. So this is like an energy conservation thing where we're trying to use our energy in the best place possible. And then we catch those automatic negative thoughts, which you guys all had amazing examples of that in the chat. I wish I could keep up fully, but I'm not quite there. And then I can stay a little later too, and go into and read through a couple of those more. And then you act and adapt, accept and adapt to the present moment with your ACT tools for those perpetual problems. So
that kind of summed it up a little bit with the two different types of helping to deal with your problems. Any immediate reactions or commentary that you have about maybe using this in your daily life?
I have one. The first thing that popped into my mind was accepting that pregnancy in the future, the path might not be as perfect as I always intended it. Oh, and that breastfeeding, I always wanted to breastfeed without any drugs, and now I've accepted that there are drugs that are safe, even though it's not my cup of tea. As much as it's not, I am learning to accept that might have to be a possibility, and so it won't stress me out as much. And yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, I
Oh
totally.
my gosh, that's a
relate with that.
huge area as a woman with these diseases. Can I have a baby? What does that look like? Oh my God, I have to have a whole high risk team of a whole set of doctors. All of that's enough uncertainty for anybody, and let alone trying to figure out how do you just deal with the fact that you don't know what your disease is going to look like tomorrow and the rest of your life.
Totally agree. And what I love is that, because I have a 24-year-old, so life was very different when I did get pregnant as far as that goes. And there's so much new information out there. So don't stop looking for that information, because it may not have been what my experience was, but holy smokes, for sure. You're exactly right. For me, it was, I needed to be off of everything. And that's why a second child never happened, because I wasn't healthy enough to get pregnant again the second time when we wanted to. But it's very empowering to just know that the options are out there, and whether it is your cup of tea or isn't your cup of tea, the choice is still there, which is really cool.
Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that also, like for me, what helps is, even though I know a problem like that I'm having, it's not necessarily solvable, but like writing out or thinking out all of the scenarios that could happen and picking my ideal one and hoping that it goes that way, like that still helps me in moving forward with whatever I'm doing. Like, even though I know it's, I always like caution myself, it probably won't go exactly the way that you want it to, but in my head, it helps me to still think about that and make a plan, but just know that the plan is going to always deviate. You're going to have to make road stops here and there and need to pivot and figure out how to move forward. But definitely accepting those things, like maybe we might not be able to have a kid, maybe we would, but it's going to be a very long process. Like, one of the things that I have to think about is, do I go back home to where my family is so that I do have more support? Because just by myself, if I'm having a bad day, my fiance is going to have a very hard time taking care of that kid on his own without any other outside help, which we don't have where we live now. So that's like a part of our thinking. Do we need to go and move back to where we were from and things like that? Cheryl is down here in the comments, so I'm going to read some of the comments that are coming up here because I feel like it's super important. So she said, so honored that you're taking the time to review my training. Such an important topic that not always is addressed for people with inflammatory arthritis. I said, thank you so much for popping in. What has been the hardest part for you about accepting things you can't control? I have such a hard time with this. She also sends the link to sign up for her email list for any other trainings that might come about. And she said, accepting the things I can't control is always harder for me, even today, but accepting that it's going to be hard makes me experience that hardness with more ease and less frustration / self-blame. That's a very good tip. On another level, I'd say that the hardest part is things that are under partial control, or whether there's an uncertain amount I might have, like maybe yesterday I could manage / control my fatigue through exercise and deep breathing, but today I do those same things and they don't work. Learning to just cope with that has been hard. I accept that it's part of life, but I don't like that. Yeah, that's very powerful. Kim says that I love that I've dropped on this. Honestly, in 30 years, I've never thought about anything like this relating to my arthritis and how it relates. I think it's brilliant that it's finally being brought up by people. So I'm so glad, Kim, that this training we've exposed this training to someone who's really needed it. And I hope that we can continue to do that with these community chats. Cheryl mentions to Daileen, there are some great reproductive health guidelines from ACR that came out last year. I've been sharing those with people too. And Mother to Baby is another organization that we always see at ACR. And I actually signed up for a study with them for when I do plan to get pregnant, because they're doing studies on the biologic that I'm on right now. Mother to Baby is another really good resource that I always recommend to people.
That is one in particular that Tiffany Westros Robertson and I have done podcasts with the people from Mother to Baby. And again, their resources are amazing. And again, so like I said, all the research that's happened is absolutely amazing. And it definitely makes people hopeful with being on biologics to actually get pregnant. And whether there's so much information out there now, I think is definitely grown and just super advantageous for anyone who's looking for that information.
Definitely. Cheryl also says most of the RA meds are considered healthy for pregnancy and breastfeeding, just FYI. But if I could do it again, I would formula feed only because it was too hard on my body, and sleep / rest needs to be my son's only food source. Yeah, that makes sense. Kim says, I'm a mother of 2 children, and honestly, nobody knew things, especially as I had metal hips too. It is possible though, so just go with things. It's worth it, even if exhausted. Yes, she talks about how she got the idea from Dr. John Gottman. That's a psychologist who talks about marriage therapy. So it makes sense that the relation to subjects that or the tools that she's talking about also really does help with relationships and using I statements and things like that. And Cheryl just said, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate all of you here for learning about this topic with me and all of you here in the chat that's been viewing. I really appreciate you being here. Any last thoughts from our panel as we close out here?
I wanted to thank you, everyone. It was really exciting to learn all this new information. I'm going to walk out of here now trying to differentiate, is it a solvable problem or is it not? So that for sure helped a lot. Thank you.
I think something that I like summarized in my head about everything that we've talked about is grounding yourself on the facts that you know and what possible avenues you know you have, and working within that and not trying to predict the future, but just making sure you know what you're fighting against and what is arthritis versus what is just a normal person's bad day.
Agree. And Cheryl is continuing to share different links and things like that. I feel like education is power, and it is empowering to actually know facts versus making up scenarios in your own head, which I used to do all the time. But putting facts behind it definitely helps. And I agree, Daileen, like the solvable problems also versus the non-solvable problems, it's definitely a theory I'd never really put my head around, and this was really interesting as well. I agree.
Well, thank you so much for all of your participation. I'm putting some links in the chat here now. One of them being to Cheryl's program that she runs for those that maybe are just recently diagnosed or that feel like they need a little bit more support in their disease journey. So you can learn more about her Room to Thrive program, where it is a very close-knit group of people and has to do with coaching and having a good mindset with your disease. So you can learn more about that on that link. I also sent over a link to our support tool that Deb was also in the midst of helping us create. It basically helps to lay out the communication between the patient and their support network. So being able to communicate and make sure that the people who are supporting you are also getting support. So that's one of the biggest things to help with communication. So I linked that in the chat also, and just some links to our other community chats if you wanted to check them out, and our talk show. So there's lots of information that are held here at AiArthritis that we have lots of videos. Kim, if this is your first time popping in and seeing us or getting to know any of our content, I would love for you to check out everything else. Thank you again to our lovely volunteers who are helping us with our panel, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your weekend, and we will see you next month on the 15th. We'll continue to be here on the 15th of the month with another watch party. So thank you all and have a great day. Bye.
Bye, everybody.